It's Corona time. COVID-19, COVID-19, COVID-19,
COVID-19, yes.
COVID-19, COVID-19, coronavirus.
Vaccine. Number one way.
Number one way. All right. Well, we have this story here from the Wall Street Journal. And we'll go through this real quick because I think it's interesting when it comes to the aftermath of the COVID pandemic. Wall Street Journal headline: Why dates and times seem to lose their meaning. I don't know why. The dates on the calendar and the time on a clock are some of the most ubiquitous and easily understood numbers in our lives. And yet, over the past 2 years, many Americans have felt time blur. They lose track of the day or hour, think more or less time has elapsed than actually has, and can't place exactly when a traumatic event actually happened. Interesting. Can't place exactly when a traumatic event actually happened. I think that says a lot about the trauma-based mind control society that we're in now. It isn't your imagination. Psychology has a term for it. Temporal disintegration. When the present seems disconnected from the continuity of time, and it plays an important role in how we perceive and respond to trauma. Okay, all right. No, trauma-based mind control is just a conspiracy theory, folks. Quote, one of the most fundamental and important and underlying principles so critical to our ability to function is we have a sense of the flow of time, said Alison Holman, a professor of psychological science at the University of California, Irvine. Oh, hey, I went there. She's recently published research showing a majority of Americans likely experienced at least some temporal disintegration during the pandemic era. That finding, she said, could hamper recovery from the pandemic. Quote, when people have a really disrupted sense of time, they have a hard time moving on. Did she mean to do that? And have a hard time focusing on getting back into their lives and rebuilding their sense of future. Got to build back better, baby. That's why you need the government. That's why you need Klaus to come in to help build back better, the Great Reset. Don't you know, Holman? It's normal to be focused on the present to the exclusion of the past and future, but if you frequently don't know what day of the week it is or can't recall if something important in your life happened a day, a month, or a year ago, or feel like the past and future have disappeared, then a more serious time warp might be at work. And then there's a little survey thing here. Extent to which Americans experienced various types of time blurring during the first 6 months of the pandemic. And almost 77% said they found themselves focused on the present moment. And then almost 66% said that weekdays and weekends have been the same. 65% said the future is uncertain. 55. Okay. All right. Great. Wonderful. In an August paper for the journal Psychological Trauma, Dr. Holman and co-authors reported on a series of questions they asked a 5,661-person panel. It's a big panel. Such as to what extent they had been focused on the present moment. And we just went through that. The researchers combined the responses to create an index of how acutely someone experienced blurred time. They found that more than half of Americans experienced most of their distortions at least sometime during the pandemic. Now, speak of the Mandela effect, you know, they're basically saying that, like, yeah, everyone had their own sort of Mandela effect in a sense. I mean, maybe not that intense, but in a time dilation where you disorient your time. And you know what is often mentioned during alien abductions or people that describe alien abductions is a loss of time. So, yeah, maybe this was one big hijacking. Ian Phillips, a professor of philosophy and psychology at Johns Hopkins University, has looked at some unusual studies to quantify time blurring. In 1962, French spelunker Michael Siffre spent 60 days in a cave without sunlight, clocks, or watches. He would call his research partners on the surface via a landline at meals, before sleeping, and upon waking up, so they could track his time without him knowing. Sorry. After some time, he would attempt to count to 120, 1 second at a time. It took him 5 minutes, but his experiment concluded after 60 days. He thought only 35 days had passed. In other words, his sense of time completely disintegrated. He repeated the experiment 10 years later, and with a 7-month stretch, and not only lost his sense of time again, but succumbed to severe depression. Or consider a particularly wild experiment from 1961. People were asked to estimate a 5-second interval while on a platform that was either being pushed toward or away from a precipice. Those being hurled toward the edge experienced a 20% slowing in time versus those being pushed away. An important finding of this research is that time blurring is correlated with stress. Yes, and it goes into some more details here. In other words, extreme time blurring might be a warning sign that someone's going through a stressful event. COVID, wildfires, or any sort of grief or disruption of life risks being traumatized by it a long time later and struggling to move on. You know, this reminds me of a Bible verse. What to do? Psychologists have developed time perspective therapies, a type of therapy talk, not medication-based, that seems to help at least some people. Dr. Phillips and Johns Hopkins initially approached the study of time as a philosopher, however, and suggests some simple advice for those losing their sense of time. Now, what do we do? Quote, if you're inclined to report that time is dragging, my life is vanishing, maybe the thing to do is simply try to inject more distinctive or unique experiences into it. Then there's more in your story to tell and it's not slipping through your fingers. More or less, he's saying, go outside. Go do something. Such a, I don't know, it's just a weird thing to be like, yeah, experience time to go outside then. Well, we couldn't because the pandemic. The passage I was reminded of is from Daniel 7, verse 25. And it says, he shall speak words against the Most High and shall wear out the saints of the Most High. Oh, can you believe it? He's going to wear out the saints. I mean, if the woke thing isn't wearing you out, imagine what this is going to be. And shall think to change the times and the law. And they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. That's the first beast. The man of sin, presumably the Antichrist. It will come in, he'll think to change time and the laws. You know who's changing time and the laws is that guy from Molossia. Little dictator man from Molossia. Bo. He's changing times and the law. So again, and he's from a tiny 1-acre micronation. Little Horn, anybody? Just a little horn that comes up, takes out 3 of the big horns, and then he takes the big seat. It's all coming together, folks.